Today's teardown is going to be a little bit different because this doesn't have piston rings. This doesn't have rod bearings. Hell, it doesn't even have rods. This is a 13B Renesis rotary engine out of a 2004 to 2011 Mazda Rx-8. This is a manual 6-port engine, and I will talk about that when we start taking it apart. This particular engine came out of one of our parts cars. I don't go out of my way to buy these as cores. There are some parts that are valuable on them, but not many, and most of the time the valuable parts are wiped out. The housings, that's like the #1 thing that people need, and they're usually bad when the engines are bad. So this has about 90,000 miles on it, which is a little past its prime. It's rare to see one of these past 100,000 miles, at least one that passes a compression test, but we're going to blast this thing completely down. As you can see, it is as complete as they come. This was pulled out of our car. Hopefully it's drained. It's going to make a mess. So let's get started. So I'm going to do my best to keep my opinion out of this video, and I'm sure I'm not going to do a good enough job, but I don't particularly care for these engines. I like the idea behind them. I do like the old ones, but they all have the same problem, and if you haven't fixed the problem in 50 years plus of production, yeah, you know where I'm going with that. So anyway, let's get started. Let's rip this thing apart. So before we start tearing this apart, let's get the plugs out of it and see what they look like. That one wasn't even tight. Rotary engines have leading and trailing plugs, and so these are the trailing, and they look black. The big thing here is to make sure that front and rear look the same. See if there's any clues as to what is wrong. Usually it's a rear rotor failure, but I mean they both can fail, I guess, at the same rate. These look about the same, so maybe they're both bad, or maybe it's just a tired engine. We'll find out. Normally, I wouldn't film myself taking off some of the external parts like the AC compressor, the intake, that stuff, but this is such a departure from most internal combustion engines that you see that I wanted to show like the entire layout, how everything is oriented on this engine. So we're going to start on this side. Obviously, it's easiest. We're going to take the AC compressor off, we'll get the coils off, and then we'll go to the other side and start taking the intake apart. That is what happens. So this era of Mazda, they're notorious for these getting frozen and galled up inside the AC compressor. We're gonna try, but it could break. These very well could break off. It's got to come off one way or the other. Nah. See the amount of corrosion that came out of there? That is pretty typical. So now these engines have oil coolers. Some of them have one, some of them have two, and they're located in the front bumper in the left and the right side air ducts. Usually we don't cut the lines, but there probably was a reason why my guys decided to saw through them. They were either rusty or leaking already. So we'll have to knock those loose, but let's go to the other side after we get the coils out, which they don't even appear to be, they're not even bolted in. I think this person before me was chasing ignition issues, but you really don't know. This is a lot of people have trouble using aftermarket coils, cheap ones like off of Amazon or Rock Auto. I would highly recommend against doing that on these. The OEM are not that expensive, and usually you don't see the same issues with them. Let's go ahead and get the battery harness out of the way. Next, we'll start pulling the upper intake off. There are just a bunch of 10s that hold this on. This is pretty easy. This is the so-called rat's nest. I mean, that's really not a thing anymore. That was a term referred to the carbureted vacuum emissions equipment, rotary engines. Turns out you need the bolts all the way out. Okay, looks like we just have a fuel hose. There we are. Now we'll go ahead and take the rest of the belt drive system off. This is just a bunch of 10s and 12s, pretty easy. Off we are. Cool, coolant, sweet. The harness is one of those parts that is worth money, so I'm gonna do my best to make sure all these connectors come off in one piece. So we're gonna work on getting this stuff off nice and neatly. Next, we're going to go ahead and take the EGR pipe and valve off. It's just a few 10s. It's really rusty. That is not what I wanted to happen. Clearly, the next logical step to take a rusty and rounded off 10 is to hammer a 3/8 onto it, right? That's what you're supposed to do. That's what we're gonna do. Oh, sweet. Well, there's only one thing left. Sweet. The next part that we're gonna remove is the oil metering pump, which is this. And if it looks like there's a throttle position sensor on there, that is actually the oil metering pump position sensor. And here are the oil injection lines, and these do have oil injectors. I will show you those in a moment. But these are pretty easy to remove. These used to be really big money, and to be honest, I really don't like selling them anymore because it's hard to verify they're good without putting them on a running rotary, and well, you have to have a running rotary first. So let's go ahead and get this one off someday. Man, these connectors are no joke. Next, we're going to pull the exhaust manifold off. Sadly, these really aren't worth anything. These always get thrown in the scrap bin. Now you get to see, start to get to see what the engine looks like. Look how thick these gaskets are. Here are the exhaust ports here and the irons, and these are the housings. Next, we'll pull the oil filter housing and the oil line attached to it. Just leave that on the housing. We really need to get this harness out of the way, and these injectors and clips can be a total pain in the butt, but we're gonna go ahead and do our best here. Sometimes it's easier to pull the injectors and rail out and then unclip them after it's out. I don't know if that's gonna be the case this time. It looks like it's not going to be the case, but we'll try. There's one. Ooh, that smells like bad gas. There's 2. There's 3. It's just one injector fighting me here. Ha. I think the worst part about this is that these connectors are brittle from being coated in oil and all the heat cycles they've been through. It makes it very challenging to pull these without breaking. Let's go ahead and get this intake off. All right, time to slide the intake out of the engine. Sometimes this can be kind of precarious. Here we've got the bare intake manifold off of the engine, and I know you're looking at this like, what the hell is this if you've never seen one of these off? Well, this basically works like a 2 or 4 barrel, like a 4-barrel carb, and these are the secondaries. So these are your primaries, and that's actually what they're called. These are the primary ports, and these are your secondaries. And at certain RPM over a certain load, the secondaries open up by rotating these 2 valves. It's kind of hard to see, but they are cut out to allow air through them, and they get carboned up really bad in the irons. This one was stuck really bad on the rear iron, but it's a system that works really well, and this is only on the 6-port engines. The 4-port engines, the automatic engines, don't have that. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about the number of intake ports, and I'll show you that on the motor. So manual Rx-8s are 6-port. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I hate to count, but on the automatic, they do not have the secondary ports. They are just a 4-port engine. They're shaped a little bit different. The irons are different. But this is where the air enters the engine and it is expelled through here. So it looks very strange compared to a piston engine if you've never seen a rotary engine, but if you've worked on these before, this looks very similar to even the earliest of rotary engines. They're all very similar. Now it's time we get back to trying to get this harness off of this engine. The connectors that like to fight are on the secondary injectors. So I'm just going to pull the rail again. Of course, one comes off separate. Are we off? Let's see here. There we are. That's much neater looking. Here are the oil injectors. So we're gonna try to be careful and get them off without breaking. They are very brittle. I'm just gonna go ahead and kind of rotate the vacuum lines on them. Here it gives you a better look at how these work. So these are vacuum controlled. I'm going to go ahead and knock those loose and pull the lines off. I do not like breaking lines. I can actually sell those. From time to time someone will break one working on them, and then they come asking me if I've got any. I tell them, why, yes, I sure do. And this is what the injectors look like. I don't have that bit of junk. It's probably from the motor itself. And our unbroken lines. This is what we're looking at now. This is what people call the keg. This is a bare short block? Yeah, we'll call it a short block. But we still have to get the flywheel off, which has a rather large, I think it's like a 50-something, 52, 54 millimeter socket. We're not going to use a socket on or tools on it. We're going to use an air chisel. I know that's a hack. Whatever. I'm not going back together. It's a core engine. We'll get it off that way. And these, the eccentric shaft bolt can be pretty tough too, but let's go ahead and try to get the flywheel off, and then we'll try to get the front off, and then we'll pull the pan and split this thing open. Yeah. See, I told you it might not work. I mean, it would work, right? That's what I said. Now you can see the ring of bolts that hold all of the cases together. This is kind of a sandwich. These bolts are as long as the engine and they clamp everything together. There's a bunch of gaskets that go between each piece. I'll show you as soon as it comes apart, but now we have to get the front eccentric shaft pulley off, which the last one I went to do was very stuck. So I have my doubts about this. All right, let's give this a whirl. I actually had to film this over 2 days because I had to go get my 3/4 inch impact to get this bolt out. This is the eccentric shaft bolt. It is the tightest bolt on any engine that I've ever taken out. I mean, every single one of these are like this. There is actually a tool to hold the flywheel so that you can use a big breaker bar to get these out. But there is not a single Honda crank bolt that holds a candle to this. This is just incredibly heavy. We can go ahead and slide this off now, and these are keyed as well. I don't think we're going to get that Woodruff key out, but there's that. Now we're going to go ahead and turn this on its side and pull the oil pan off of it. Sweet big mess. It was drained, past tense. And there's the bottom of the engine. You can really see the difference between the irons and the housings. There's a little bitty pickup. Let's go ahead and get that out of the way. Dipstick out. Now we're at the stage where we get to split the entire engine apart and see what the inside looks like. And to do that, we take those long bolts I spoke of earlier. It's this ring of 17mm headed bolts. It sandwiches everything from the front cover all the way to the rear iron. And yeah, we just gotta blast them apart, and then the engine literally just splits open. So you can see these are really long, finely threaded bolts. Before we go trying to split the case completely apart, I got a couple bolts left in it. We're going to pull this front housing off. So there's the front counterweight. Here's the chain. This is the eccentric shaft here. This is the oil pump. There's counterbalance. We have a giant woodruff key. Let's go ahead and knock that oil pump off. There we go. Put that over here. Got one bolt holding this whole thing together, and it's already puking a bunch of coolant. We're just gonna go ahead and zip this out and rip that Band-Aid off. That one's kind of rusty. There's the rear iron. Let's see what this looks like. I don't see too much wear. Oh, but I see problems already. These are the side seals. These are responsible for keeping coolant and oil where they need to go. So your apex seals are here. They are at the edges of the peaks of the rotor. These are the rotor side seals. This one just came off. The other two already came off when I pulled this apart. That's pretty normal. And you want to look for deep gouges and signs that something has been loose and run through the engine. Let's see, we should be able to slide the rotor out. Yeah. Let's do that. There's the rotor. One of the apex seals just fell out. As you can see, the rotor is pretty filthy. This is pretty typical of a 100,000 mile motor that hasn't been apart before. These are the apex seals, and there are springs that push these out. They lose their tension. And then they also get carboned in place. And you never really want to use a screwdriver or any kind of prying device to go between the irons and the housing. You can damage the surface, which renders the housings pretty much useless. So I just give them a little tap. Just a couple taps here and there. There we go. Go ahead and get the dowel out of the way. See, these seals also go bad. I don't really see it too much on this generation. They're not as old yet, but especially on the 12As and the early 13Bs, these seals will get super hard and they'll develop external coolant leaks. Another thing that's really important to note is the condition of the face of the rotor housing. You want to look for scratches, gouges, any imperfections. We're going to go ahead and put this in the parts washer because I can't really tell anything right now. So we're going to go throw this in the parts washer, and hopefully it'll look nice and clean with no damage. So now you get to see the eccentric shaft. And as you can see, this is kind of the motion. I'll show you when I pull the next iron off the other side, what it looks like when it spins over. There's the front iron. And this is your intake, and this is your exhaust. And here we have the center housing or center iron with the front housing, and as you turn this over, it's kind of hard to do with the rest of the engine, but you get the idea. It's pretty much impossible to do this. I don't even know why I tried this. There we go. So let's go ahead and slide this rotor out. Seems to be in a bind. There we go. So take a look at the apex seals. They do have some wear. They're falling out already. Really hard to tell if there's any damage here. I'm gonna throw this in the parts washer also, but first, slide that over here. Slide this the rest of the way apart. All right. Now that this engine is pretty much completely apart. I've got the eccentric shaft in the center iron. And here's a trick to getting this out. You just got to turn it a certain way. And it comes out. And this is a pretty cool piece. I don't really see too much damage on these ever. It's not like a piston engine where you can have a bad journal. I mean, I suppose you could, but these are usually in pretty good shape. Usually it's just a compression issue, which you can tell from the worn apex seals. Sorry, I'm just looking at everything here. So I don't see any like straight up obvious signs of damage. It's not like this engine ingested anything. I wish it had some more damage, to be honest. It'd be really good to show you. I'm gonna go ahead and throw this other housing in the parts washer so we can check out what they look like. So these are the springs I was talking about. These are kind of like leaf springs, kind of arced, and they push up on the apex seal so that the apex seal always has contact with the housing, and that's how it retains its compression. So I've got all the parts out of the parts washer, and this housing actually isn't too bad. I don't feel any major grooves with my fingernails. There is some wear. The cleaner and clearer it looks, usually the better. But again, I don't really sell housings from these. I don't really get any calls or any demand for them. But I did want to clean up and show you what to look for. This one has a definite groove. You can definitely feel it. Not so much in the upper areas. Well, I guess you can feel it. Let's see here. Yeah, you can definitely feel it. I don't think this engine failed in a catastrophic way by any means. I've seen them when an apex seal will come loose. And when that happens, I mean, there's definite gouges and this is all torn up. This is likely just an old tired motor. Probably, it had 90,000 miles on it, and definitely not a Mazda reman. They're usually marked like that. I also ran the VIN through Mazda's system, so I knew it wasn't going to be at least a factory reman, if anything. But everything looks pretty good. The eccentric shaft is a pretty cool piece. This will likely end up on our front counter with all the other neat stuff that comes out of engines. Like I said, I don't really see a lot of issues with these, but it's still a cool piece to look at. And here are all the seals and the keepers. Not all of them, but most of them, and the springs. I just kind of want to show you what they look like. They're just really thin pieces of metal. Obviously, they all go in a certain way, which you can't tell by this, but these are the apex seals here. This is what usually goes flying out in a catastrophic failure. These are all just what normally happens that I see with Rx-8s is that these get carboned in, and the springs cannot push these back out so that they lose compression. It's mainly the automatics are much worse about it than the manuals are. The manuals are typically driven harder and they don't really have as much carbon. However, this one was still pretty carboned up, so likely had low compression. Again, I never did a compression test to verify that. This car was half taken apart, so I just finished the job. For you Rx-8 guys out there shaking your fist at me, I don't think Rx-8s are bad cars by any stretch. I love the chassis. They handle great. They're great to drive. And I also don't hate the rotary engine. I actually have an Rx-7 myself. But I think that when average people that are not car people or enthusiasts own them, that the engines don't last anywhere near as long as a standard piston engine can. It's just been my experience. My dad is a retired Mazda master tech, and I cannot count the number of Rx-8 engines he's had to replace. I literally can't count. If you were noticing in the background of some of the later scenes from this video, there's some new stuff. I went shopping. I bought a bunch of engines. I got some stuff I've never taken apart before. I've got an LLY Duramax out of an 05 Silverado. I've got an EJ253 out of a Legacy. And there's a LS460 engine. And then I've got a 3-liter Eco Diesel out of I think it's a 2014 Dodge Ram. So that'll be an interesting one. But I have something else that's going to be next. As a matter of fact, it is still on the truck. The very next video is going to be this Ford 5-liter Coyote V8. I finally got my hands on one, and I know some of you guys are saying, yeah, I mean, probably not that excited about it, but I am, and it will be the very next engine teardown video. I hope you enjoyed watching me take this Renesis apart, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.